When you see the Losi LMT on the workbench and the tires are coming off of it, you know this isn't just going to be a fun bashing video. Let's talk about what's going on here. If you checked out last week's video, you saw me take this Losi LMT and one of my micro monster trucks, the Fury Tech Rampart truck, out for a nice little bashing session. You might have noticed I was in a different location this time, and that is because of weather. We've been having a whole lot of rain non-stop, raining just about every single day, so I haven't been able to get out with the no prep car. I know a lot of people on my channel follow me for that. Haven't really been able to get to none of my normal bashing spots with these monster trucks. I really wanted to put that micro monster truck through the dirt and see what it could do, but I just wasn't able to get out there. So you saw me on a tennis court, which isn't the best place for a monster truck, granted. In that video, I noticed a couple of things. First of all, I noticed the suspension kind of starting to get dirty. It looked like I don't have much oil left in here. These shocks are starting to get kind of grimy, so I want to rebuild those, and that's what we'll be doing today. I also realized that even further the other day when I went ahead and put on these limiting straps. In the past, not with this truck, but with my SMT10, I've had a lot of issues with overextending the suspension and the sway bar is actually flipping around the opposite way. So I knew I needed some limiting straps. So while I picked some up for that truck, I also picked some up for this one as well, just to kind of complete the look, add a little scale detail there. And when I was putting these on the other day, figuring out where to mount them, I noticed that, yes, sure enough, these shocks did need to be rebuilt. I think it's time. I've put the truck through the water and the dirt a good bit, so it's time to replace the oil in them and freshen them up. I noticed a couple more things while I was doing that, just looking at the chassis of the truck, and I don't think we're gonna get to most of those in this video. Waiting on a couple of parts, but we're gonna talk about those things. First of all was the front of the chassis. I'm sure you saw that in the last video, but the chassis actually completely bent. I noticed it at the end of the video. What actually happened there was one of those very hard hits on the front on concrete of a tennis court. This front chassis brace, which is where the original body posts come through, cracked in half and completely bent the aluminum side plate of the chassis. And it made me realize something, which is that this truck really does need that cage it comes with originally. So when I painted up that turbulence body a while back, which I still love, I had to take that cage out. That body didn't fit with the cage. I had to put the body post in, and you might have seen in recent videos how beat up that body is now, landing on the hood of the truck. There's a lot of weight to this truck, more so than the SMT10. And that weight has ruined that body, and now, without a cage or anything to support the front of the chassis, it's also bent the chassis. Now, the chassis wasn't a big deal. I just straightened it back up. There's a little cosmetic damage there, but nothing crucial or anything. It'll still work fine. But I do want to get to running that cage again, so it looks like it'll be time for another body painting video, which I know some people enjoy as well. So if you're new to the channel or haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do, because we'll be getting the body painting video pretty soon when that body comes in. But I decided to pick up a body that would work better with the original chassis, with the original roll cage, to give me some more support and strengthen the frame. Speaking of the frame, another thing I realized was this wheelie bar is starting to bend. It's taken a whole lot of hard hits throughout my time bashing this truck, and you can see it's kind of swaying to one side. I was just gonna pick up another wheelie bar to replace it while I was ordering the body and cage parts, but I didn't want to go with another plastic one. I figured that would bend just as easily again, and I wasn't too interested in paying for the aluminum ones that are out now. My fix for that, of course, is to try to make a carbon fiber one, because, you know, I like making carbon fiber parts. It's kind of fun. So I have some 3mm carbon on the side over here. Hopefully that'll be strong enough. If not, I may even double it up and make 2 panels on each side, so we'll have 6mm of carbon fiber. Probably try to use this same center brace and the same back roller wheel, or whatever you want to call that thing. May even 3D print a new one, since this one's kind of beat up, but that'll take care of my wheelie bar issue. As for the rest of the frame, I've been sort of thinking of something. I've seen a bunch of them on Instagram and just on social media in general. These trucks are kind of built high, with the battery mounted way up here. You can see I have my battery box out right now, as well as the ESC or the electronics trace mounted kind of high. There's a whole lot of stuff to get weight more down towards the ground, lower that center of gravity. And while I could just go ahead and buy a kit online to do that, like I said, you guys know me, I like to make things myself, so I'm probably gonna take some inspiration from those kits that are already online, but I'm gonna model up something myself and probably 3D print these. Maybe mixture of 3D printing and carbon fiber, but I'm gonna model that all up and do some 3D printing, get me a LCG battery mount, as well as ESC and receiver tray. I think that's about it for the chassis though. Let's go ahead and rebuild those shocks. The only shock that doesn't seem too bad was that one that I had to replace the shaft on a while back, but the rest of them are pretty crunchy, I would say. So I'm gonna go ahead and rebuild these, clean them up. From the factory, these shocks come with 25 weight oil, front and rear. I'm gonna be going ahead and putting 30 weight in today because that's what I have. There shouldn't be much of a difference between 25 and 30 weight really. Not that much anyway in a bashing truck. That oil is definitely dirty. One thing I didn't think about doing before, which I should have, is actually cleaning all of the dirt and dust and everything off of the shocks before opening them up. That way I can make sure none of that gets inside the shock body and causes any grit inside that oil. I'm gonna go ahead and clean these up real quick, and then we'll finish emptying out the oil and refilling those up. One other thing I want to do before I put new oil in these shocks is actually lube up the O-rings on the bottom. I know this isn't no like crazy super tech tip, but this is just something I do when rebuilding shocks on these monster trucks. I'll take the bottom cap off like that and then just drop a little bit of shock oil down on the shaft and on those O-rings, and then work the shaft up and down a couple times. Do it one more time. Work it up and down a couple more times, and then we can screw that cap back on. Not over tightening, just sealing it. And now it takes a little bit of that grittiness out of the movement of the shock. Obviously you could get way cleaner if you actually took the shock shaft out and replaced these O-rings or cleaned them up really nice, but for a little quick rebuild job, this works well. And now we're gonna fill up our shocks. I know this isn't rocket science and most of my viewers probably know this already, but for those of you who don't, we're gonna take our shock and try not to spill it. Fill it up with some oil. I'm about 3/4 of the way there, halfway maybe. And I'm gonna work the shaft up and down a little bit. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see inside there, but we wanna get those air bubbles out. We don't want any air trapped underneath the piston. And I'm gonna add a little more oil. Again, working the shock shaft up and down, making sure we have no air bubbles. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and fill it up till it's about 2 millimeters, I'd say, from the top. One more time, just working air bubbles out. And now I'm gonna leave it about half compressed. Put it in my stand here, and we're gonna let that sit for a couple minutes, letting the rest of those air bubbles rise to the top. I went ahead and spilled a whole bunch of shock oil on my fingers, but now we'll let these sit. Like I said, let the rest of that air travel out the top. And once that sits for a while, we'll come back, bleed those shocks, and get them back installed. So the way I bleed shocks, simple enough. These shocks have a little set screw up top. Loosen that a bit, and we're gonna make sure we don't have any more air bubbles in our shock. I'm gonna add just a little more oil to it, and now we're gonna tighten the cap on. I am not an expert at this, and I know there's many people out there that are better than me, but this is the way I do it. So I'm gonna compress the shock now. You can see I have a lot of pressure here. Can't go anymore, that means the shock's overfilled. So I'm gonna loosen a couple of turns and finish compressing the shock, and we should see some of that oil flowing out of the threads. I'll wipe up that excess oil. There it is. Go back, tighten the shock, compress again, so we still have a little too much oil in it. The shock feels good. These set screws, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I'm gonna try to bleed it out of there. It seems like I'd have to take it all the way out, which I don't wanna do. So I'm just gonna tighten that back and we'll loosen up the cap again. And we have a little bit of rebound at the bottom there, but not much. I'm satisfied with that. I'm gonna go ahead and do the other 3 and get those back on the truck. Before putting those shocks back on, I wanted to go through the chassis a little bit, kind of, you know, check sway bars, suspension links, make sure there's no binding, make sure it's all free moving and there's nothing out of place, no wiggling around. I had a few rod ends to replace, which I went ahead and did that, but I also found something that I wasn't too excited to find. But see here, it wasn't just the front of the chassis I bent. I bent both of the 2 front plates on the chassis. So I took the time, went through, took the whole front end apart and went outside and used the vise and a hammer and some time and straightened those back out as best I could. Put it all back together and now I'm really happy with where the chassis is at. So we'll throw those shocks back on and then we'll wrap this up. The suspension is all back together now. Everything seems like it's working right. I like the feel of everything. I'm gonna throw those tires back on and talk about what we got going on here. Obviously, you can see the battery tray and the receiver and ESC are out of the truck. Like I mentioned, I'm gonna go ahead and do some 3D modeling and create some LCG trays and parts to fit in there. I think that'll help the truck performance-wise and also look really good in there, especially when we get that new cage in. I decided to pick up a new cage instead of using the old one because I'm not going with a blue theme. That cage was blue and I could dye the parts, but you could see some of these parts that I dyed blue in the past are now showing some wear and tear, and you can see the blue through that black. So a new cage is on the way, a new body is on the way. Make sure to comment down below. Let me know what you think I went with. I'm not gonna give you any hints or tell you what I'm doing just yet. Let me know what body you think I went with, what colors you think I might paint it, if there's a theme to it. Leave your speculation down below. I think we're gonna end up showing all of that in that video. We're gonna go ahead and put those low center of gravity parts that I come up with, as well as paint the body and install that roll cage and everything in the next video on this truck. So leave a like if you enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe if you're interested in that video. And as always, thanks again for watching. Peace.
Yeah.